Give me a second here.
Daniel, are you okay?
I am the Vampire Lestat.
Why are we pushing?
I'm immortal, more or less. The light of the sun,
Somebody get him a glass of water?
the sustained heat of an intense fire. These things might destroy me, but then again, they might not.
Hi guys, and welcome to the first session of Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat Book Club. My name is Kirsten, and if you are just joining us and do not know what Reid Along is, I will link some previous videos down below, as well as links to my Instagram, my Twitter, and our Google Classroom, where you can find further explanations on everything. But to summarize it, it is a semester-long seminar course / book club centered around reading The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. Now, we are reading The Vampire Lestat in anticipation for AMC's Interview with the Vampire Season 3, which will be focused on bringing The Vampire Lestat to life for the first time onto the screen. So every 2 weeks there are discussion questions, there's a discussion video in which the questions are used, and this is our very first one. So I am excited and nervous. I would like to thank everybody that has been part of Reid Along so far. If you have been answering questions and submitting them, if you've just joined and have spread the word around, if you have just supported me in any way with doing Reid Along, I really appreciate it. This has gotten bigger than I thought it would. And that's a lovely, wonderful thing. You know, we are in the middle of a hiatus that will be going on for who knows how long. And I think it's important that we focus on positivity and trying to bring as much joy and intellectual conversation as we can into this fan base. And so Reid Along getting larger and larger every single day is really amazing, and it's very scary. And I'm having such a great time. And there was a total of 22,152 words answered for the first 7 questions of Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat Book Club. And that's a crazy number. But I do not want to waste too much time on this introduction. So we are going to go ahead and get started on Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat Book Club Session 1, in which we read Downtown Saturday Night in the 20th Century, 1984. And we had 7 questions about this section, but also about speculation for Season 3. This section is only 13 pages. And given that it's a very short section, I wanted us to have that opportunity to not just ease into this book club and all of us trying to get our footing there, but also to have some opportunity to talk about Season 3, given that this book is Lestat. As we all know, we have a lot going on with all of our other characters, and so it was a good time to bring that in. So, the first 3 questions of Reid Along were our questions that were predominantly about the book. And the first question read, "The opening monologue of The Vampire Lestat is an iconic novel opening. What does this monologue really show us about Lestat? And how would you describe his narrative voice? How does his narrative voice differ from Louis'? And this can pertain to book readers and to show watchers, given that many of Louis' own lines in the show are pulled as direct quotes from Interview with the Vampire." So a lot of what the answers were talking about were, there's a conversational tone to Lestat's versus Louis' more poetic prose. There's this centralizing himself in his own story, where Louis kind of removes himself from his own story. While he's telling it, it's not necessarily about him and the way that he's telling it. There's very much this like push forward attitude that Lestat has in comparison to Louis' kind of melancholy that allows him to get stuck in places oftentimes. There's a general sense of optimism, which is something that I think has been missing from Louis' narrative. I think we get caught a lot in him trying to figure out what's going on with the whole memory thing. And then just his general, grieving of Claudia makes this a very kind of sad, morose tale in comparison to Lestat's very blatant optimism. There was a thing about Lestat and believability, and about how, like, yes, we believe him a lot, like with what he's saying, because there is a truthfulness in Lestat's earnestness, but also sometimes it's like, I don't know. So we're going to talk about that. His self-destructive tendencies, the introspection of Louis in comparison to Lestat's more action, an exaggerated sense of like self, and a quiet hidden weight of emotion. Let's talk about all those. So there were so many great answers, and Alex said, and a lot of this is going to be alphabetical just on how they were coming in on Google Classroom. So Alex said, for me, Louis' narration always felt like he was fixated on the emotional, philosophical, and moral weight of his experiences. It was very introspective and poetic, but chock full of guilt, self-loathing, and inner turmoil all the time. He was on a mission even if he didn't fully understand the mission at the time of embarking on it, while Lestat is the opposite. He is here to set a record straight. So I think with Louis, obviously we have the memory issue coming into play that we see very heavily in season 2, but then you go back and watch season 1 and you see where the memory stuff plays out there as well. And so I think there's this, he knows he's trying to find something, but he doesn't know what it is. And so I think that sort of removal of himself is almost like trying to look at everything from an outside perspective in hopes of like tracing where things went wrong, where things got lost. Almost this like trying to map out where he came from, and to do so he needs to not be in it, he needs to be removed from it. Meanwhile, Lestat is very present, kind of all the time. Like he's very much like, well, I'm not gonna dwell, I'm not gonna worry about the future. I'm here and this is what's going on. And I think we see that a lot in this opening monologue. Alice says, he seems a lot more conversational and informal than Louis. Louis was quite poetic throughout his narration, but I also get the impression that he's going to be more dramatic and possibly exaggerate stuff. Lestat, never, especially some emotions. And I think Lestat and emotion is something that I do want to talk about. I might wait till we're further into the book because I think you'll see what I mean. So I'm gonna wait till we get further into the book to talk about Lestat and emotion, but I'm actually gonna make a note of that, like doing a thing. Okay. Andre says, traumatic things happen to him, and instead of letting it consume him, he either deals with it or pushes it down so he doesn't have to think about it. Breezy says, I notice some self-deprecation alongside what might seem at first glance like vanity when he describes his appearance and his success. So I think too with Lestat, that self-deprecation thing, I think that's what somebody was talking about, and it's a little further down this page, where they said that there seems to be like, yes, he's very confident and very whatever, but there seems to be a weight. Like you can tell something is there, like some negative emotions are brewing under that surface. He's just not talking about them. The main things from Carolyn says, the main things we see right now are that Lestat has an optimistic narrative voice and can be fun and funny, and he can make fun of himself too. And talks about how out of touch with the youth of the 1980s Lestat seems to be, and how she hopes that they keep that in a little bit. And ends it with, I hope Lestat will say things like a velvet-lined motor coach on TV. I really want it. Please, Roland. Roland, are you listening? We have a list. She also says that TV Louis certainly feels at times as though he's been drained of some of his innate essence of self, especially who we saw in New Orleans. And I agree, and I think that that's something that, while I know Louis is not going to be narrating anymore, we're obviously getting Louis and we're getting him talking and everything still. And I think I talked about it in my like season 2 finale video, maybe in the video beforehand, about how I really hope that we get an aspect of like New Orleans Louis back. Even the stuff that we see in Paris, like when he's talking to Claudia at that dinner, and he's talking about going to the art galleries and going and like meeting up with other photographers and stuff. And there's so much life to Louis that has just been so repressed. I love you, Louis, forever. Here's the one about sort of Lestat's believability. It makes me laugh when we juxtapose how Louis and Lestat describe how broken and scared of everything Lestat is in his wilderness years. Yet Lestat here is like, yeah, I was a bit scared, ... But in 3 days I was roaring around on a motorbike. Like, I don't know whether to believe you, Lestat. And I think that's true. And I think that's something like Lestat's push forward attitude is such a driving force behind who he is that he will be like, I'm scared anyway, moving on. There's a part later in the Vampire Lestat, and I won't spoil it, but this like horrible traumatic thing happens, and it's on like, you know, whatever, page like 253. It's actually way later than that, but, and then it ends. Next chapter starts on page 254, and it just says, 2 years later, and I'm like, you skipped everything that happened after that horrible thing? What is wrong with you? The self-destructive excitement on how Lestat talks about being hunted and known as no mythic monster had ever been fought by man before does tie into how Lou was expressing himself at the end of season 2. Yes. And I have so many thoughts on that and about Louis in season 2, like at the end, and Lestat just as a character. They're gonna be on the same page. It's gonna take us a while. We're gonna get there though. HP said, the first and strongest impression is his obvious sense of exaggerated self-importance. Lestat's voice feels very clear, concise, and detailed, which all lends to this feeling. The other main feeling I got from the opening monologue is a sense of melancholy, as though there is something weighing him down, especially when he says, the light of the sun, the sustained heat of an intense fire, these things might destroy me, but then again, they might not. This adds a bit of vulnerability to his voice, along with some insecurity I felt as he described his appearance. All these feelings together, however, really come together to create Lestat's signature brattiness in a way that feels really quite similar to his show counterpart, at least who we've seen so far. She talks about, I like highlighted this answer because I really liked what she was saying here, is that both Louis and Lestat have this very grandiose way of communicating the details of the story, but the biggest difference is like a vulnerability, because Louis won't, and we see it in the show so much, like talking about season 1 and where he's recalling his life with Lestat and Claudia, and that's such a good moment, and we see like these snippets of happiness, we see this good, but he doesn't let himself live there. And so Lestat's, you know, vulnerability and being open about the good and the bad and the things that he likes and things that he doesn't really do kind of set him apart from Louis. But yeah, there was just a lot of really great answers here. A lot about Lestat's thirst for knowledge and kind of this really getting to know him for the first time. You know, we have seen little snippets of Lestat, we've seen things about him, but we have not met him, and I don't know if we're gonna meet him right away in season 3. I think season 3 is going to be the journey of us meeting Lestat. I don't necessarily think the Lestat that we're meeting, I don't think the Lestat we've seen in the teaser trailer is our Lestat either. All right, question number 2 was, for my seasoned readers, what are your favorite bits of foreshadowing in this first section of the Vampire Lestat? And the other part of the question was, for my first time, or possibly just earlier readers, are there any lines or paragraphs that stand out to you? And if so, what are they and why do they stand out to you? So Alex, I did bold yours because you said I am somehow not a first-time reader nor a seasoned reader. I am in fact a secret third thing, which is a person with a goldfish memory that only remembers things that she likes. I agree. I've been working my way through, obviously, for the next session of Reid Along, and reading through this really slowly, and I'm like, I've read this book 20 times. I don't remember that. So yeah, it's really fun to just rediscover things that you read 42 times. But there were a couple things, and I went and put tabs on the general sections. So somebody had quoted the part where he says on page 6, but after the third night up, I was roaring around New Orleans on a big black Harley-Davidson motorcycle, making plenty of noise myself. I was looking for more killers to feed on. I wore gorgeous black leather clothes that I'd taken from my victims, and I had a little Sony Walkman stereo in my pocket that fed box art through the tiny headphones right into my head as I blazed along, to which I wrote a quote next to it, Bach, always Bach. The vision. Imagine. Just picture it. Just think about a black leather jacket. think about a motorcycle. Think about Sam Reid. Just think about it. Just give yourself 1 second. One of the things that several people did mention was very early. It's when Lestat decides that it's time to rise. He says, "It took a week to rise, more or less. I fed on the fresh blood of little animals who live under the earth when I could catch them. Then I started clawing for the surface where I could summon the rats. From there, it wasn't too difficult to take felines and finally the inevitable human victim, though I had to wait a long time for the particular kind I wanted, a man who had killed other mortals and showed no remorse." And we see this continue throughout this opening monologue a little bit, Lestat's hunt for criminals, and there are several people who are kind of caught up in that doesn't sound like our Lestat from the show, and there's a lot of question about, is that something that Lestat has developed later? Is that something that we're gonna see more in this book and that Louis got wrong when he's like recalling all of this? I have a lot of thoughts on that because I can't necessarily say that I feel like there's a right or wrong answer all the time. I do think it's interesting to note like that in season 2 episode 8 that as far as we can tell Lestat's been living off of a rat diet, and he doesn't have to. And while I do think that Lestat has a type when it comes to his kills, I think you're gonna notice when you get into his early vampiric years, things are a little different. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. Another section that somebody mentioned is that he talks about like women and like women changing since his time period and how that kind of shows a love of humanity in a way. Like he's just interested in watching that kind of stuff. He's just like, wow, like that's different. And he's not looking at them as victims. He's not looking at them as whatever. He's just like, wow, like that's different than how it used to be. There are several mentions of Egypt in all of this, so that's something people talked about a lot. But the main thing that at least like 20 people put in here is the section that I want to focus on right now, which is on page 9 in my version of the Vampire Lestat, which says, "In the amber electric twilight of a vast hotel room, I watched on the screen before me the stunningly crafted film of war called Apocalypse Now. Such a symphony of sound and color it was, and it sang of the age-old battle of the Western world against evil. You must make a friend of horror and moral terror, says the mad commander in the savage garden of Cambodia, to which the Western man answers as he always has answered, no. No. Horror and moral terror can never be exonerated. They have no real value. Pure evil has no real place. And that means, doesn't it, that I have no place." And then he goes on to say, "It was enough to make the old world monster go back into the earth, the stunning irrelevance to the mighty scheme of things, enough to make him lie down and weep. Or enough to make him become a rock singer when you think about it." Don't really know how those like correlate with that, but you know, you do you, babe. I'm just here to support. But that line, so many people talked about the pure evil has no real place, and that means, doesn't it, that I have no real place? Because there are so many things going into that. First of all, there's this idea that Lestat thinks of himself as pure evil. And, you know, and I think a lot of people would agree. I don't think that's true. I don't think Lestat is pure evil. I don't really think many a thing is pure evil. Obviously, everything has nuance and everything has levels and depth. So there's kind of already this idea of what is pure evil and why does Lestat assume that it's him? And then second of all, this idea of place and belonging. We see it in season 1, episode 2, when he's talking to Louis at the opera, and he's talking about loneliness, and he's talking about vampires like needing to have someone and needing things. But I think that also has to do with the reason they get so lonely is they are so taken out of their own time. This is a conversation that comes up in season 2, episode 6, when Louis is trying to get Armand to turn Madeline. And Armand and Madeline have that wonderful conversation in that episode. And like Madeline's kind of laughing about it. And while I appreciate her take on it, and I don't necessarily think she's wrong, I do think that, you know, she is just a human. She hasn't been removed from that yet. And it's really easy to say like, no, that'll be fine when you're not experiencing and living it. But Armand has lived that. He's lived that for so many years. I guaranteed Armand has a whole other list of traumas that, you know, if his life was a little easier, he probably wouldn't be that like meh about it. But that's another story. So I think this idea of Lestat needing to belong, it has to do so much with that push forward attitude that he has as well. Because yes, he feels like he needs to belong, so he's going to belong. He's going to make himself belong. The 80s rock star is big. I'm gonna be an 80s rock star then I'll belong. He is, and I was talking to a friend about this just the other day, and she said that, you know, one thing about Lestat, and if you want to like compare Lestat and Louis in this situation, is that Lestat is the masculine energy of action. He is constantly doing something. If he has a question, he's not sitting there contemplating the question. He is going to go find the answer. And if there is no answer, he's going to make an answer. Where Louis is much more of like the cerebral. Louis is going to sit there and contemplate. He's going to dwell. He's going to analyze. And so Lestat's action is what allows him to find those places, even if at the end of the day, he doesn't feel like he really belongs in those places. There were so many things about that particular moment and this idea of the old world monster. And I do think if you want to sum up Lestat as a character, but also the Vampire Chronicles as a whole, this idea of not having a place and therefore where do they go? What are they supposed to do? If you read all the way through the series, you know, part of that means carving a place for yourself. Vampires in literature and lore as a whole have always represented the other, and there's an otherness to vampirism, and you see that. But yeah, that's a really important section here in this first little bit of the Vampire Lestat. All right, so the next question 3, was what was your favorite part of this section and why was it your favorite? So this is a question that will be asked in every session of Reid Along, because I think it's important just to know what did you enjoy. So I'm just gonna read through some of these because I think they're great. My favorite part, I don't know. I mean, anytime he mentions Louis, of course, which is a very common answer here. I love the opening monologue now. The first time I read Vampire Lestat, I was 16, which, by the way, this is my first real copy of Vampire Lestat I've ever had, and it has annotations in it from when I was 16 years old. 16-year-olds are dumb. I don't know if you've ever met one recently, but they are concerning. And some of my annotations just have me like looking at it, but then also several of my annotations are just like hearts drawn around Lestat's name. So, you know, 16-year-old me, she knew what was up. But I remember the first time I read Vampire Lestat. I'm 16. I just read Interview with Vampire like the week before, and I loved it. I loved Interview, and I devoured Interview with Vampire. I get my hands on a copy of Vampire Lestat, and I start reading it, and I think I got to page like 6 or 7, and I hated it. I closed it. I put it away. I'm like, I'm not reading that. I could not take his I am the Vampire Lestat thing like seriously. And I was like, where's Louis? Like, kind of going back to that question 1 with the difference in their narrative voices, I hated Lestat's narrative voice. It took a friend convincing me, like, she's like, Kirsten, you have got, just get to the wolves. And I was like, the what? And she's like, get to the wolves. I was like, okay. And things immediately did change once you get to the wolves. And now the opening monologue's really fun. But yeah. So here are just some people's favorite moments. So Alex says, I love it when Lestat just rambles. Like, he always gets to the point eventually. Alice says, shout out to every time that he says things like rock video films or velvet lined motor coach or portable computer word processor. Very much in line with Armand's your electronic mailbox. There's a lot of, I enjoyed him discovering and reading Interview with the Vampire. It's like that Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen moment. My favorite part is when Lestat discovers that people already know that his name is from a character in Louis' book. I think that would be really funny, and I'd love to see that played out on the TV series. I think that would be amazing. I don't know how that's gonna work because Daniel is on TV right now trying to like announce that this is like real and vampires are real and everyone sucks. But I think Mayfair might be showing us something going on. I don't know. Don't quote me. I don't watch Mayfair. I just see clips and things. And Telemasco show, I think, too. Danielle says, in fact, after reading his account of things, I ached for him, ached for his romantic illusions and even his dishonesty. I ached even for his gentlemanly malice and his physical presence, the deceptively soft sound of his voice. Anything Lestat does, in fact, keep us all alive. Lestat's commentary on the modern world filtered through the lens of his 18th century sensibilities feels remarkably authentic. It genuinely captures the perspective of someone from his era grappling with the complexities and peculiarities of contemporary life. I love that answer. And I do think it's true. Like, and people did talk about, I didn't want to get into it in this video because I think it would take up a lot of time. I think it would be a great like separate video to do at some point about how some of the stuff that Lestat says seems naive. And it does. The things early on where he's talking about, kind of talking about the changes that have happened in the world. Like at the bottom of page 8, as for sexuality, it was no longer a matter of superstition and fear. The last religious overtones were being stripped from it. That was why the people went around half naked. That was why they kissed and hugged each other in the streets. They talked ethics now and responsibility and the beauty of the body. Procreation and venereal disease they had under control. And it was mentioned that, you know, this is written kind of right as the AIDS crisis was getting really big. And so that seems naive. And somebody had asked, you know, is that an Anne Rice being naive thing or a Lestat thing? It's very much a Lestat thing. Anne was very in tune with the goings on in the queer communities. She lived in San Francisco during like the height of the hippie movement, which is when a lot of this queer, you know, change was happening, when like it was getting a little bit more acceptable, when there were a lot of like activists being heard and making themselves take up space. So she knew. I think this has to do with like Lestat coming from the 1700s, and he's seeing this, and it probably does seem better than the 1700s, because I do think about how like sleek and everything things are, and how good people are at putting on like facades and in like a more modern time. And I think Yasra, like you said that the best. You were one of the people saying a lot of stuff, like talking about, you know, kind of what's going on, and then said, my favorite part was reading Lestat's description of a 20th century New Orleans, not necessarily because I agreed with his very optimistic view of the New World, but because, well, I spent the last 2 questions criticizing him for it. Reading about all the progress that we've reached from an immortal being's perspective, someone who has witnessed horrors we only read about in history books, was fascinating. And then also it provided insight into how Lestat as a character sees the world and his place in it, and how he thinks and what he prioritizes. Taylor said the slang. I love when he first meets Satan's Night Out and he talks about them playing together, and then has the quote, they turned on the tape machine and we began singing and playing together, jamming as they call it, which is very cute. The opening monologue, the first page, Elsa, you and I were on the same page. She said I had to close the book and almost threw the book across the room the first time I read it. Agree. Same. It's such a tonal shift. It's crazy. Emily says, I love the section when he is explaining his plan of action to Christine for her to execute. It shows his enthusiasm for action and extravagance. He is not one to half-ass anything ever. Correct there. Also, I just also picture this poor, kind of like harried but like excited woman just like, oh my god, like he just has so many demands. And then where you're so correct, Cal, the thing that I did mention earlier, which is that it also establishes what seems like a tendency to breezily drop something very heavy and then go back to talking about phones. or seashells or music. I don't remember which book it is exactly, but one of the books, like Lestat gets like very caught up in a Walmart and just like stares at labels under fluorescent lights for a while. And so like, he does just like get caught up in kind of everything, but then at the same time he'll just be like, oh yeah, so then like everyone died, but then I was at Walmart, and you're like, you gonna process that? No? Okay, that's cool. Clara said that the opening is just simply too iconic, and that Sam Reid reading the opening paragraph while looking straight at me like he's going to seduce me into being his dinner gave me literal chills. I mean, that's a way to word that, that's for sure. Carolyn, you and I are on the same page. We'd better see Lestat standing stock still beneath a streetlight, whipping through Interview with the Vampire at an insane speed till he exasperatedly tears it to shreds on TV. Yes, I think not only the cinematography of like a very faded and dim city behind with this like street light and Lestat standing there leaning against it with a book and just everything that like will look like, but I think also how much Louis's words consume Lestat, like truly, like whether it's good or bad, you know, whatever. I think this idea that this is Louis, like, is going to be such an overwhelming thing to see again. And then ultimately just this overwhelming feeling that he gets from whatever he's reading. So the next 4 questions were more about season 3 speculation. And so the first question number 4 of the entire thing says, at San Diego Comic-Con 2024, the first teaser trailer for the Vampire Lestat was released. There were several direct references to the first section of the novel, the rockstar persona, I am the Vampire Lestat monologue, etc. But there were many more things setting us up for the future. Did anything in the teaser trailer stand out to you as a reference to other parts of the Vampire Lestat or any other Vampire Chronicles books? And what was your favorite part of the teaser trailer? So to summarize the things that people really picked up on and that we all have kind of discussed, and I know we've discussed them in previous videos and everyone's talked about it on Twitter and everything, is the mention of Christine Clare, Lestat's lawyer, being thrown into the teaser trailer is great. The next thing was obviously the red choker, slit throat reference, right? It's great. The next thing was some of the Egyptian stuff. When Lestat is sitting there at one point, you can see kind of like there's like an Egyptian pharaoh head thing, which obviously for those of us that do know, and for most people they've picked up on it at this point, those who must be kept, we will be focusing on Egypt and Akasha and Ankle and everything that happens there. So kind of a little teaser for them. And like all the crying was mentioned, which has to do with the emotion thing I want to talk about. Should I talk about it in this video? No, we're gonna wait. That's a later conversation. And then kind of just how the song itself references Louis, right? We do have Louis in our song. So yeah, those were kind of the things people were picking up on. Other things people talked about as like favorite things, Alice says like the implication of just Daniel and Lestat like interacting, terrifying. It's actually so scary. Tommy said that he really liked the way that Lestat took control of the camera, and I hope that there will be more of that literal manipulation of the story in season 3. I loved that. And I think too, what's great about it, and it's something that I put as like a question for myself, I guess, in this opening section of the Vampire Lestat. On page 6, he says, as for my strength, well, it was 3 times what it had once been. I could leap from the street to the top of a 4-story building. I could pull iron gratings off windows. I could bend a copper penny double. I could hear human voices and thoughts when I wanted to for blocks around. And I suppose, obviously, we know that the Lestat in our show knows that he's powerful, and he mentions in season 2 episode 8 and like that tower scene how I have the blood of Akasha in me, and so I know he's aware that he's powerful, but I do wonder if he truly grasps how much power he has, and I don't know if he knows that. But so I think that literal manipulation, the power that wields, is kind of crazy, and I do hope that we really get to see Lestat's power at kind of its height throughout this. I know obviously in the flashbacks we'll watch it grow, but I'm talking like the modern day Lestat, because I know that's crazy. We have a lot of the Armand told the truth tattoo. I don't even want to think, like, what? I don't trust that man as far as I could throw him. Yasra, you mentioned this is something, and like, no, like, if I said this on Twitter, we'd all get dragged. About how the makeup and hair teams have been consistently great during the course of the show, and yet his look in the trailer had a distinct hint of he's kind of a mess right now. I agree. And I know that that's intentional. We have such a wonderful costume department. Carol Kutchell, I love you forever. Tammy over on makeup has been consistently amazing. And so they're not doing this not on purpose, you know? And it's not that he looks like bad. Like, obviously, that's an attractive man. It's very hard to make him look bad, but he looks like a disaster. And he intentionally looks like a disaster. I think it is showing us so much. Like, one of my predictions more so with season 3 and this like rockstar persona thing is how much the rockstar is not Lestat. Like, that whoever we are going to see on the stage is not Lestat. It's never really Lestat. Like, he is a good actor. He is a good performer. And we are seeing a performance that is a broken man. And he is very much hiding behind a facade, and like that's so much of what I think about season 3. People get very like caught up and just like, oh, like Lestat and blah, 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 blah. I get it, like, don't get me wrong, I do get it, but I don't think that's him. And I think that's what they're trying to show us here is like, don't even think that man crying on the floor is him. Like, that's not him either. Taylor mentions, I love how like Mark Johnson is name dropped, and Tammy, the makeup artist, is actually like name dropped, sort of this breaking of the fourth wall. I am so scared about the doors that opens up. What I am gonna say is AMC, if you are looking to break the fourth wall, like, I can pretend to be an interviewer for like, you know, on like, I'm trying to think of, I'm literally blanking on all platforms. We can pretend I have a really famous YouTube show and not just me, you know. I'm cool with that. You need a concert goer? I do barricade at like all concerts. I'm really good at it. I dance and I sing, and I'd be really great at that. AMC, hit a girl up. I'll fly. You need me? I'm out of here. Let's go. Elsa says, I love all the outfits and the fashion, even though I wouldn't have minded a more gothic version of him in all black and leather. I also love that he wears so many colors and that the outfits are kind of out there. I think we will get a lot of the all black. I think that I reference them a lot. I like them. Again, people will drag me for it. I don't care. I love Måneskin. I've seen them in concert just twice. I was barricaded at my last one. That was so much fun. I don't know if any of you follow Måneskin like at all or closely, but when they were touring, one of my favorite parts about them is like, so Damiano, their frontman, he's a great frontman, you know, like he's got the personality. In 2021, I actually said a thing about like, this should be Lestat when he's a rock star. Damiano. Listen, I've been on this train for a long time. So when I went and saw Måneskin in Detroit, Damiano comes out in this like really like flowy shirt, and it's like sequined and like whatever. And naturally, like, he always ends up like basically getting naked. So like that comes off, he's shirtless, it's a thing. But the day before, they'd had a concert in Chicago, and he had walked out wearing these like very nicely tailored like gray slacks with this like kind of billowy but like really nice like light blue button-up shirt, which also came off and he was shirtless. Like, again, it was a thing. But Måneskin's like costumes, their like concert gear was constantly changing from concert to concert. That would be like a day apart. They would do a festival and they would all be on stage with something with like pink feathers on it, and then the next day everyone's in like black leather harness. It was great. Like, you just never knew what you were gonna get. And I really kind of want Lestat to have that kind of thing going on, where he's like in the chartreuse coat that he has on, like that jacket, right? And then the next day, like he's got on like a fucking wife beater and a black leather jacket and sunglasses. Like, that's what I want. I want like that much of a dichotomy in his outfit choices. I don't know if it's gonna happen, but I think it's a possibility. He wears the black leather stuff all the time. Also, you also mentioned that you like where his eye color changes from gray to blue to violet, because that's such a book thing, and it is. If you've ever met a blue-eyed person, every blue-eyed person in the world will tell you that their eyes change colors. It's an exaggeration, but it's true. They do say that. Katie said, I feel like there hasn't been a day that's gone by without discussion of this is the real Lestat, or, well, book Lestat would do XYZ, despite the many times it's been stated from multiple cast and crew that the show is an adaptation. These characters are going to change and frankly need to change. Listen, there was just something that came out with Sam Reid, I think on Autumn Brown's channel, where he's talking about, like, yes, there are absolutely aspects of Anne Rice's Lestat and the Lestat that I am, but, like, this is an adaptation. It's not just that. And I love that, and I think people need to keep it in mind about a lot of things, especially when you look at the books as these, like, larger scheme. Cam talks about how that, you know, she never read it, so she says, I didn't even know it was the monologue of the book, so then reading it, like, I got chills. Like, such a good promotional material. And it's interesting that they're tying in Daniel interviewing Lestat, and I'm gonna be curious how Louis is brought into that. And I think my favorite part, besides how good Sam Reid looks, is that he has a wedding ring on. What's that about? What is that about? Dreamstat with the wedding ring in Dubai still ruins my, I don't think about it, because I'm just like walk in circles around my house trying to make sense of it. I love the part where we see the emotional roller coaster, but I also love the final shot where he's staring into your soul, and it very much embodied the line in the book where he says, I crave war. Can you imagine getting to hear that line? That would be so crazy. Carolyn says, everything from Lestat's look to the tone of the music and Lestat himself. Comparing to this introduction, I feel like teaser Lestat feels more cynical than book Lestat, and I feel like the full-on positivity of an 80s Lestat might not work in the 2020s, so I absolutely am here for that. He's still totally fun, but a little broken. Yeah. She continues on with, the only being who outright lies in season 1 and 2 is Armand. But Lestat also seems very annoyed at Daniel in the teaser, and so I wonder whether Lestat will be angry not due to the contents of the book so much, but rather the fact that Daniel has written and published the book at all, and therefore Lestat might perceive that is Daniel who has put Louis in danger by publishing this, and it will draw attention to Louis. Listen. Not to get like all Lestat pilled on everyone. Just kidding, that's all I do. Like the idea of their like mutual attempt to protect each other makes me feral. I can't think about it. So, all right, question 5 said, the teaser trailer for season 3 clearly shows us a time jump from the last time we see Lestat in New Orleans in 2-8. How much time do you think has gone by, and what do you think our main group of characters, Lestat, Louis, Armand, and Daniel, have been up to since the events of 2-8? So, questions here were all over the place. Some people think it's only been a couple months. I've got some people thinking it's been several years. I don't know what it is. I think like 2 years sounds like a reasonable thing. I don't know, how long does it take to get a book published? I mean, because we know time has gone by, like, clearly, right? And I do think Lestat's like rise to fame is fast. It's fast in the books as well. But there still has to be, like, to get a documentary made about you, and from where he is in season 2, episode 8, I don't think he's, like, gonna be famous in the next, like, 3 weeks there. Now, guarantee he probably could, honestly. But we don't know. So, that answer's kind of all over the place, and I agree, I don't know. It could be really anything. A lot of thoughts with Daniel are, you know, obviously Daniel's been kind of like a rampant little vampire. Who said it? Somebody in one of these questions said the funniest thing, and it was just about like, Armand literally ruined everybody's life by making that man a vampire. That's going to be the craziest vampire. Daniel is going to be insane as a vampire. I'm actually not ready. Oh, it is. It's Alex. He said, Daniel being a terror, I don't think I need to elaborate any further on that. Truly a top 10 Armand crime, giving that old man eternal life. honestly a top 10 Armand crime, and that's crazy because Armand's crime list is nuts, as we know. I am going to save some of the Louis conversation for the last question, which is all about Louis, but there's a lot of thoughts on Daniel, like trying to actually find Armand, which I agree. I think Daniel wants that confrontation. I'm sorry, Devil's Many, and people that love them as like a romantic thing. I don't think we're getting that this season. It's just a guess. I think Daniel is very angry in a lot of ways, and even while he might embrace and love being a vampire, I think he's angry how it happened. I think he's angry that it was taken, like the choice of it was taken from him. So I do think he wants that confrontation with Armand. I think Armand's little self is doing what Armand does best, which is going underground. However, on very unpopular opinions, I do think that we're gonna see some Armand and Louis interaction, maybe minimally in season 3, but I think it has to happen. There has to be an actual conversation between those two. And I also think people are underestimating Armand's craziness. Do you think Armand is just gonna let Louis go? Armand. Do you think Armand's gonna let Louis, like, that's crazy. Armand loves things, and he loves them so obsessively and so wholly, to the point to where, like, he kind of is like, if I can't have you, I'll kill you. The idea that he won't do that with Louis is crazy. He kind of does it with Louis, like, already. I think the trial aspect is this idea of, like, I couldn't rely on you loving me, and if I couldn't have you, I was gonna kill you. I can see Armand kind of inserting himself still into Louis' life, and Louis not being happy about it. I actually have some Louis Armand theories for season 3, but it also has to do with Louis Lestat theories for season 3. Those are probably another conversation. I think Armand in general is underground. Like, he knows everyone's mad at him. He's not stupid. So he's hiding, right? Yeah, thoughts here just kind of all over the place. Daniel, you know, is clearly making a name for himself in the vampire world and the human world again. And with this interview thing with Lestat, who knows what that's gonna look like. We know that they've clearly made contact since then, which is so scary. But if you read Interview with the Vampire, like, that's what happens at the end. Like, Louis finishes this interview and he attacks Daniel and whatever, and then it ends with, and quickly the boy noted, Lestat, off St. Charles Avenue, old house crumbling, shabby neighborhood, look for rusted railings. And then, stuffing the notebook quickly in his pocket, he gathered the tapes into his briefcase along with the small recorder and hurried down the long hallway and down the stairs to the street where in front of the corner bar his car was parked. So, like, Lestat, Daniel, at the end of Interview with the Vampire, is planning on going and finding Lestat. Kind of canonically, like what we're looking at. You know? So that makes sense. All right, the 6th question, we're so close, was in the Vampire Lestat novel, Lestat is a bona fide 1980s rock star. The 1980s was the height of the rock star, and given that Anne Rice wrote the novel in the 1980s, Lestat's chosen music path to fame makes perfect sense. AMC's Interview with the Vampire, however, is not going to give us the 1980s rock star in his prime. What do you think Lestat's rise to fame is going to look like in the modern take of the rock star, and what do you think his music, which we've already heard a sample of, is going to sound like? And a lot of the consensus with Lestat is, like, his rise to fame is going to look a lot like what we've witnessed with Chappell Roan in 2024. And she just, like, took off like crazy. And I do think that's what we're going to be seeing with Lestat. Like, he's just kind of nowhere, and then all of a sudden it's just this explosion and his face is everywhere, and they want him at every, you know, concert venue in the world, and they want him to lead festivals, and they, like, you know, all that stuff. I think that's going to happen. And I know that we have that huge list of inspo that they've said, so I think that, you know, is obviously like a huge thing to consider. There's a lot of talk about David Bowie being like a huge inspiration. One, as something that they've talked about, but two, David Bowie as, like, you know, he was a queer figure, and, you know, his outfits were out there and, like, all this other stuff. So there's that aspect, but also there's the aspect, and I don't know, like, I know a lot of people know this, but, like, Daniel Hart, who does the music for Interview with the Vampire, worked with David Bowie. And so I think, like that sound, like the idea that that sound will be heard a lot is really important. It also gives us still kind of that aged music that's just doing well in a modern time. If people don't know, Anne Rice based a lot of Rockstar Lestat on Bon Jovi. She loved Bon Jovi. And so I would like, like an instance that kind of feels a little Bon Jovi-ish, but like, that's fine. Jim Morrison too was one of her Rockstar Lestat inspos. I'll try to find the list that Roland did and put the clip in here.
David Bowie.
Oh, obviously.
Mick Jagger, Bjork, Freddie Mercury, Mark Sandman, Franz Liszt, Otis Redding, Moses Sumney, Douglas Dare, Red Cross, Lang Lang, Iggy Pop, St. Vincent, Prince, Florence Welch, Jim Morrison, T-Rex, Gustav Mahler, Brendan Flowers, Fiona Apple, Serge Gainsbourg, Electric Light Orchestra, The Sweet, Nick Cave, Raleigh Ritchie, Benjamin Clementine, Chapel Rowan, Gustavo Dudamel, David Lee Roth, Ryan Cadner, John Cale, Jeff Magnum, Paul Westerberg, Daniel Hart.
A lot of talk about Queen, which I love, again, with queerness, and then just the power of Freddie Mercury. And the final question for this first session of Reid Along is, Louis is unapologetically my favorite character and the central character for everyone else in the show at the moment. While his presence in the books is diminished, the Vampire Lestat is ultimately written for him, and the show has made it very clear that he will continue to be one of our two leads. This means we're going to have a lot more original Louis content. What are some of your predictions for Louis in season 3? All over the place. But also on a consensus. Let's talk about Louis. Okay, I'm not gonna get too much time to talk about Louis in this book, so let me talk about Louis for a minute. Louis, what's going on? So a lot of the thoughts are with art curating and photography, which I agree with. I think that, and I hope that he is finding the things that make him happy and can, one of the issues he had with photography was that it was the 1940s. The technology is 1940s. He's a vampire. You can't go out during the daytime, so whatever. We don't have those issues anymore, baby. It is 2025. We have cameras that work at night. So let him actually show the talent that he does have, that he was held back by circumstance for. And I think we'll get to see that. And then of course, again, as we all have seen, we hope that transfers into photographer Louis for his rock star husband, I think the art curating is really important. It's an interesting thing because art is very much associated with Armand and Marius, very heavily associated with those characters. And I think that's a way that they can, looking at the future, I do think season 4, when we get to the end of this book and this traumatic, awful thing happens to Lestat, I think that Louis is leading the charge in season 4 of the show. And I think a way to set that up is to have him meet Marius. And that doesn't need to be a good thing necessarily. Everyone calm down. But I do think they need to meet because I think they can meet through art because Marius is going to be a key figure in season 4. Key figure. And so I think that would be a thing that you could do here. I don't know, but using that art curating to lead him to Marius. In turn, a lot of people are talking about Louis and the Talamasca. And how he might get involved with that, and I think that could be part of it. In other books of both the Vampire Chronicles, the Mayfair Witches, everything, the Talamasca own a lot of things that vampires and witches have had over the years. They have a locket of Claudia. They have paintings that Marius made. They whatever. So this idea that Louis might end up at the Talamasca, whether it's searching up stuff for Claudia, possibly these missing diary pages, which is a big thing people have talked about too in the Reid Along answers. I think all of that is a possibility for him, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. This idea of possibly tying him into Talamasca and in turn setting him up to take charge in season 4. Alex mentions that maybe seeing what his bloodline is up to. I've never thought about that. Because, like, Louis in the books doesn't really dwell on his family. I know that seems not true, but, like, in interview, he talks about his family for the first, like, maybe 10 pages, and then he never really, like, talks about them again. I'm not joking either. He's turned on page 13 of this book. And, like, he just, like, never really talks about his family again. So I've never thought about that. But, yes, I guess with showing us, like, you know, nieces and nephews in season 1, this idea that there are other monologues out there, that's crazy, actually. Or Lestat's whole bloodline gets, like, killed in the French Revolution. Like, you know, we're looking at very different things going on there. There's a lot of talk about, like, Louis trying to be, like, a voice of reason for Lestat. I don't know if I agree with that, because I don't think Louis is very reasonable right now. His whole, like, I'm in Dubai, come get me thing, I love the energy. I appreciate it. I don't know if he's the most reasonable person right now, but, you know, it's cool. Yeah, Danielle mentions, like, it's also possible that Louis might want to carry out Claudia's wish of discovering and understanding the origins of the vampires, which could tie into working with the Talamasca. Listen, that also ties into the whole Marius thing. I'm just telling you, I think that's, like, a thing that has to happen. There's a lot of hope that he will be at least part of the tour to some extent. And then, yeah, which I think he has to. He has to be there for at least aspects of Lestat telling the story. Taylor says, I hope we get to see Louis discover his memories that have been tampered with and get ownership back of those. Justice for my sweet prince. Yeah, I agree. Elsa says that I hope we get to see some dream Louis, that we get some flashes to Lestat in the coffin and Lestat in this shack in New Orleans, and that in turn Dream Louis exists. If you don't know, I'm very partial to Dream Lestat. I loved him long before we really knew what Dream Lestat was at all. I've been, like, obsessed with Dream Lestat as, like, this concept. He holds a very special little place in my heart, so I would adore a Dream Louis. And Sam and Jacob do believe that there's a Dream Louis. They said so in an early season 2 interview, which I'll put the clip.
Do you think there's a Dream Louis? Like a dream Louis? Yes, I'm interested.
This one was interesting. Andre says, I also feel like Louis' hallucinations / illusions are going to be stronger in this next season because he could be alone. I haven't really thought about Louis and hallucinations again, which is crazy. I didn't, like, really think beyond that. I think, again, setting up for season 4, there are some twins that are really important, and I feel like Louis might have some visions of them. Like, if that's a thing that they want to work with, Louis would be the person to do that with. Imagine. Katie says, I hope that we get to see him leaning into his love of literature and art and living his best life. However, we are also a Lestat situationship truther because I can't go a full season without them kissing again. It's not fair to me, it's not fair to Jam, and I trust Roland to know where the bread is buttered. Katie, it's like you read my mind. Yeah, I don't see us doing that. I definitely see Lestat stuff happening this season. I have a lot of reasons why, but I definitely see us getting more than just one kiss this season. It's not a storyline, but I also would get to see Louis on the back of his man's motorcycle this season. That would just be sexy and satisfying. Picture that. I know we already done the picture, like Sam Reid with the, like, a leather jacket on a motorcycle, but then picture, yeah, that's a vision. Okay, all right, somebody send that to the writer's room right now. Cal says that I do hope that we get to see something about Louis adjusting to what it means to be black in the modern day. And I think that that's a really important thing, and that I think that the show will do, because Louis being a black man is obviously such a change from the books, and it's changed his character in certain ways, in a very positive way. And I think that to not continue to focus on that when we see where race comes into play in both seasons so heavily would be a disservice. And I don't see our writers, like, just neglecting that suddenly after 2 beautifully written seasons. So I do think that that's a thing that we need to focus on. HP says, I feel like Louis is going to play a big role in connecting all the story arcs that we'll see this season. Same. Again, him being the central character to everybody is why when people kind of downplay, like, oh, I don't think Louis is going to be in season 3 much. Disagree. Clara says that while I do want to see him, you know, do all these things, I also really just want to see him as like a rock star wife. Like, he's already going to be stuck babysitting Daniel until Armand comes back. And we've seen Daniel's a merciless killer. So I want him to heal, and he deserves a break where he gets to be a rock star's wife for a while. And you know what? Yeah, you know, when have we seen Louis just get to like have a good time? Very rarely. Let him be pampered for like a minute. Let him have a great time. Let him be the rock star's wife, you know? Rock star girlfriend. Louis de Pontulac. Let him have that. Cam says, is it weird I sort of want flashbacks of what Louis was up to when he was with Armand too, though? No, I don't think that's weird. I think it's unpopular. But I don't think it's weird. I really wish we could get some more of that exploration. We're not going to. I don't think we'll ever see past Louis and Armand again. I think we'll see future. I think we will see what they've become. But that would be cool. I don't know if it'll happen. It could be a way to tie in some more like Assad into the show though, because I don't anticipate a ton of him this season. Not like a little bit. Like, it's not like, oh, I think he's in it this much. I just don't think it's gonna be like every episode like season 2 was. So I mean, that could bring him in more. Heather says, I hope we see Louis come into his own power and start to accept what he is more. We don't really get to see that in the books until after Merrick, when he finally accepts the blood from Lestat. And I hope we get to see him taking his place in the world more fully. I would love to see a confident, artistic Louis being involved in Lestat's tour, maybe direct some music videos. That'd be fun. I do think, like, you know, they've done aspects of Merrick already in the show. And what's funny is, like, obviously, as a Lestat-brained person, the best part of Merrick really is, like, when Lestat comes out of that coma and saves Louis from death, and they have that really weirdly erotic, like, blood exchange for, like, 3 days. Which ultimately makes Louis insanely powerful because of how powerful Lestat is. I think we've kind of experienced that. Like, Louis fed from Armand. Armand's also very powerful. And I know we don't see it, but again, I think it's something that Louis has just not told us. But like, Louis and Lestat have fed from each other. There's no way that that's not happening on like a daily basis in their little weird New Orleans household. There's no way. Those two are, you know. But those are the first 7 questions to Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat Book Club, for the section Downtown Saturday Night in the 20th Century, 1984. Thank you so much for sending in answers. If you've watched through this video at all, thank you. I hope this was okay. I am working on trying to get some guests to have some conversations, and I would like to open the door to the idea of, if you guys would like to have a live meeting that we could like get on and talk and people actually like have conversation, I would be open to that. I just need to know if there's enough interest. We need to set some moderated rules for if that were to happen, and it would be essentially like a live conversation about just these questions. If that's something people would be interested in, I don't know. But I did have a great time reading through everyone's answers. People put so much thought and work into these, and I am going to compile all of them in a much like cleaner thing and make it accessible so people can read through answers that people had to these questions and see what people think, and you know, conversation can come from that. I'll have it on Google Classroom, and if you guys would like to have some combos about that or anything, I'd love for that to be like an option. But it really was so much fun, and it was really cool seeing how many people like read a book together. Like, we're reading books together, and I just think that that's really neat. And we're having these in-depth conversations and answers about them. it's really fun. This is what I wish I could do all the time. This is what I wish I could do in my job, and I can't. So I appreciate everyone that's been part of this and continues to support it. And I hope that it only gets better from here on out. The next session of Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat Book Club, is session 2 of 6, and it is where we will be talking about the early education and adventures of the Vampire Lestat, and specifically talking about part 1, which is called Lelio Rising. Look at these pretty drawings in this one. And part 2, which is called The Legacy of Magnus. Lelio Rising is 44 pages. It is pages 21 to 65 in my version. And part 2, The Legacy of Magnus, is page 69 to page 129, so right at 60 pages, giving us a total of 104 pages for this next session of Reid Along. But thank you so much for joining me for session 1, and I am so looking forward to meeting up again to look at session 2 and to talk about Lestat and his human and early vampiric years. I'm gonna cut that. We'll cut that. That's why I shouldn't be leading this book club. This is not an Armand safe space, everybody. Just kidding. I love Armand. I don't know how I feel about Armand. Let me not lie. I don't know how I feel about him. Do we still have like music groupies? Like, do we have like an Almost Famous-esque like Band-Aid group? I'll do that for the Vampire Lestat concerts. You just gotta hit a girl up.